the principled call of the international community. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thanking the representative of Republic of Korea for the statement, I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I'd like to thank ASG Yanka and ASG Monsieur for your informative briefings today. Colleagues, the world has rallied around President Trump's call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine has agreed, and we echo that call again today. Yet week after week, night after night, we see the number of Russian assaults grow. June was the deadliest month yet, and July is on track to be even deadlier. This makes a mockery of the diplomacy that Russia claims to support. And the consequences are even more devastating for the people of Ukraine. Across 5 nights, from the 18th to the 23rd of July, Russia launched over 940 drones and 59 missiles at Ukrainian cities, killing 20 civilians and injuring a further 216. Just days before, a record-breaking 728 long-range drones were launched on Ukraine in a single day. Since the start of the invasion, over 13,500 civilians have been killed and more than 34,000 injured. This includes more than 200 children killed or injured since March alone. We cannot allow ourselves to become desensitized to these figures. Behind each Russian strike, there is a person, a family, a community whose lives have been torn apart by Russia's brutal military invasion. The Shigids are one such family. On the 5th of June, as a Ukrainian firefighter arrived at the scene of a Russian attack on Chernihiv, he discovered that his wife, his daughter, and his grandson had all been killed. His grandson was only a year old. 3 generations lost to cold-blooded Russian brutality in just one night. This is not an isolated incident. Families like the Shigids are being torn apart across Ukraine and have been since February 2022. Russia has a clear and unqualified obligation to uphold the UN Charter. Russia also has an obligation to respect the Geneva Conventions and to the protection of civilians under international humanitarian law. There is simply no justification for brutal aggression like this. The reality is clear. Ukraine, a country illegally invaded by Russia, continues to show its commitment to peace. But President Putin prefers war. He is shunning diplomatic efforts made in good faith to bring an end to this horror, a horror of his own making. There is no ambiguity about what needs to come next. It is time for Russia to stop prevaricating and agree to an immediate and unconditional ceasefire as the first step towards a just and lasting peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening today's meeting. I would also like to thank Assistant Secretaries General Yencha and Ms. Suya for the updates provided and for their work. In the 33 days that have elapsed since our last meeting on this topic, the situation on the ground has gotten considerably worse. The continuation of intense fighting in several regions and escalated attacks on civilian infrastructure continue to devastate civilian lives and drive displacement in Ukraine. Meanwhile, nuclear safety and security remain under threat, with the IAEA reporting yesterday that their team at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant continues to hear shelling, explosions, and gunfire almost every day. Earlier this month, the site's training center was targeted in a drone strike, resulting in damage to its roof. Guyana deplores the ongoing attacks on or near nuclear power stations, given the risk of severe and indiscriminate harm that could result. We call on the parties to the conflict to eliminate such plans from their military strategies. Mr. President, we have been consistent in reaffirming full respect for the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter and the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Likewise, we have also been consistent in calling for a peaceful end to this war. We welcome the talks that have taken place in Istanbul and join fellow council members in welcoming the recent agreement for another round of exchanges of prisoners of war. Nevertheless, we have noted that these periods of progress continue to be interrupted by increased attacks and heightened rhetoric. We urge the parties to ensure that progress is sustained by prioritizing the protection of civilians, fulfilling their international legal obligations, and ultimately agreeing to end this war peacefully and definitively. Guyana believes that many opportunities have been missed since the adoption of Resolution 2774 5 months ago, a resolution which, while not perfect, provided the first glimmer of hope since this conflict erupted. 5 months on, it appears as if the main obstacles standing in the way of peace are the absence of firm political will and an unwillingness to compromise and find common ground. Meanwhile, the civilian death toll continues to mount, and many more lives are devastated and put on pause. We call on the parties to engage in good faith and to bring an end to the suffering of the millions of men, women, and children. This includes those displaced from their homes and mourning the loss of loved ones in both Ukraine and Russia. Guyana further reiterates its call for the Russian Federation to immediately withdraw its military forces from the internationally recognized territory of Ukraine and to comply with its obligation under international humanitarian law to facilitate unhindered humanitarian access to those in need in the temporarily occupied territories. Mr. President, colleagues, it may be tempting, I'm sure, to imagine that one party will emerge victorious from this conflict. However, with nearly 50,000 civilian casualties reported to date and an unprecedented humanitarian crisis emerging, there will be no winners in this war. While the buildings are damaged can be rebuilt, the lives lost cannot be resuscitated, nor the injuries erased. But one thing remains clear: a call for peace is always relevant, and the choice of peace is never too late. The time to answer that call and to choose peace is now. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Yansha and Assistant Secretary General Joyce Masuya for your briefings. And I welcome the representative of Ukraine. More than 100 days have now passed since this Council adopted a resolution imploring a swift end to the war and urging a lasting peace between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Since then, there have been some positive developments. UN Security Council Resolution 2774 paved the way for technical talks in Saudi Arabia and bilateral talks in Istanbul, resulting in the return of thousands of prisoners of war. But the progress we've seen has fallen far short of what is needed. Ignoring this Council's call for lasting peace in Resolution 2774, Russia has continued to kill Ukrainian civilians. Russian drones and missiles have struck schools, playgrounds, apartment buildings, and nursing homes. Russia has deployed thousands of DPRK troops to its front lines and sent tens of thousands of Russian soldiers to die on the battlefield just to gain a small amount of ground. Mr. President, colleagues, the war, killing, and destruction must end. As President Trump has repeatedly stated, there is no military solution to this conflict. On July 14th, the President of the United States put Russian President Putin on notice to agree to a peace deal within 50 days. If Russia does not agree within that timeframe to stop the attacks, the United States is prepared to take further measures. Additionally, we again urge all countries, including China, to stop exports to Russia of dual-use goods that contribute to Russia's war industrial base and enable its drone and missile attacks against Ukraine. Beijing's claim to have implemented strong export controls on dual-use goods falls apart in the face of daily recovery of Chinese-produced components in the drones, weapons, and vehicles that Russia uses against Ukraine. Mr. President, now is the time for all UN member states to do our part to bring this war to an end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Mr. President, I wish to express my appreciation to ASG Yanka and Masuya for their briefing. My delegation remains gravely concerned by the continued deterioration of the humanitarian and security situation in Ukraine. The latest developments only reinforce the urgency and the complexity of the crisis before us. In that regard, I would like to make the following points. First, we are deeply troubled by the ongoing escalation of attacks impacting civilians and essential civilian infrastructure. The protection of civilians and critical infrastructure are obligations enshrined under international law. We reiterate that all parties to the conflict must respect and uphold these principles without exception. Second, we remain convinced that there can be no military solution to this conflict. Dialogue and diplomacy are the sole means to bring an end to this long-standing conflict and achieve sustainable peace. Continued hostilities serve only to prolong suffering and further diminish prospect for a sustainable peace. Diplomatic channels must remain open. In that context, we welcome the ongoing discussions in Istanbul between the Russian Federation and Ukraine concerning the exchange of prisoners of war. While these negotiations are not without challenges, they represent a constructive step on the humanitarian track. Progress, even incremental, on such issues can pave the way for broader engagement and contribute to building the trust necessary for peace. Third, we emphasize the important role of the international community in supporting diplomatic initiatives and fostering conditions conducive to a peaceful settlement. Any durable resolution will require compromise, confidence-building measures, and genuine commitment to dialogue. We reiterate our call upon all parties to exercise restraint, recommit to diplomatic efforts, and work towards an immediate and comprehensive ceasefire. In closing, Mr. President, our delegation reaffirms its unwavering support for all efforts aimed at addressing the underlying causes of the conflict and achieving a just and lasting peace in accordance with the United Nations Charter. The people of Ukraine and all those affected by this crisis deserve a future founded upon peace, security, and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. Panama regrets the accident that occurred yesterday in the Russian Federation, and we'd like to extend our condolences to the relatives of those who lost their lives, as well as the people and government of Russia. President, we welcome the convening of this briefing and the timely participation of Mr. Yensha, ASG, and Ms. Msuya, ASG. They have provided us with detailed information about the humanitarian situation